Hello there, I am Amos Murphy, co-founder and host of the City Ramble, a daily Manchester City podcast covering all things from the world of Manchester City, where at the moment, after a positive start to the new Premier League season, we have plenty of smiles on our faces, which wasn't always the case last season, and I think it's safe to say that a lot of clubs would have taken a third place finish and a run to the FA Cup final. But relatively speaking, to Pep Guardiola's lofty standards, it does go down as a pretty poor season. So City have spent plenty of money, they've brought in plenty of new faces, they are rebuilding their squad. Sorry Spurs fans, I don't mean to rub it in, but there is definitely optimism around the Etihad Stadium and in the Manchester City faithful ahead of what is being tipped to be possibly a return of Manchester City to the top table, to those top positions, Premier League, Champions League. Can City get back to where they belong, they deserve to be? Obviously, in previous years, Manchester City versus Tottenham hasn't been a fixture filled with optimism for the Blues. It has often been a game where City have come unstuck. The examples are there for everybody to go back, and if you're of a Spurs persuasion, probably revel in and look back with on fond memories, especially last season where Spurs got a couple of victories against Manchester City, not least that 4-0 battering at the Etihad Stadium in the midst of City's darkest period of the entire campaign. Losing 4-0 to an Ange Postecoglou team, goodness me, that was a low point, I can't lie. But Spurs were great that day, and Spurs have been great on plenty of occasions where they've visited the Etihad Stadium. So even though it is the second game of the season, even though both teams started off looking pretty strong in their opening matches, albeit against relegation candidates, there is a sense of this being a pretty big game, a bit of an early test, a yardstick to see where both teams are, a litmus test, all of the analogies that you want to throw in there. What I think will be interesting from a City point of view is how do they go about the game? How does Guardiola approach it? Because there was somewhat of a handbrake off approach against Wolves at the weekend. There was wingers that were happy, fullbacks that were happy to get up, wingers who were always focused on going forward, midfielders. I'm sure most people saw the performance of Tijani Reinders, who was a standout for City and I believe will be a standout throughout the entire season. You'd expect that he, as well as Erling Haaland, retain their place in the starting 11. It'll be interesting to see what happens at centre-back, because John Stones played his first game, competitive match anyway, since February against Wolves, and it was a bit of an eyebrow raiser when he was named in the starting 11. He partnered Ruben Diaz, which City fans have plenty of fond memories from the treble campaign when those two were together, but it's been a while since we've seen that consistently. Has John Stones got another high-intensity match in his legs, or will we maybe see Josko Gvardiol come back? Well, he's been missing from training, I believe anyway, or he's not been featuring because of what we are told is an injury problem, which is a little bit of a shame because he has been fantastic for City in the previous two campaigns. If it isn't John Stones, if it isn't Josko Gvardiol, then maybe it will be someone like Manuel Akanji. Well, he's also been linked with a move away this week, so there is certainly a question mark over that part of the pitch. Reinhard Nori made his Premier League debut. I would expect he would start at left back again, albeit Nathan Ake could come into that position, and the right back again. Plenty of question marks in City's defence. Does Guardiola go for somebody like Rico Lewis, who was fantastic stepping into midfield? Does he maybe go for the more eccentric pick with Mateus Nunes, obviously typically a midfielder, but has been turned into somewhat of a makeshift right back in the absence of that player in that position? Personally, I feel like because Rodri is almost certainly not going to be involved from the start, we'll wait to see if he's on the bench. I think Guardiola goes with Rico Lewis. He can help step into midfield and give a little bit of extra protection. Which brings me on to the midfield, which worked so perfectly against Wolves. Nico Gonzalez, Tijani Reinders and Bernardo Silva. If I'm going to be confident about any part of the pitch, it's that those three will partner each other, create a nice balance in midfield. It was the first time we saw it in a competitive fixture for City, but it worked really well. As for attack, left wing has sort of thrown up a few question marks heading into this game. Doku didn't necessarily have the best of performances, against an Ange Postecoglou team, you might put him in there and you say let him run wild because he'd cause havoc in that in the space behind the defence with a high line. Thomas Frank, I would assume, would not adopt a similar strategy, and rightly so. So maybe it's someone like Omar Marmoush comes in. Erling Haaland obviously will start in attack, and Oscar Bob, who has somewhat displaced Savinho. Rumours that maybe one of the reasons he's wanting to get out of City at the moment is because Oscar Bob is being almost touted as City's first choice right winger. Well, the pressure's on Oscar Bob. Can you perform? Can you show why Guardiola has put so much trust in him? In terms of the way that the way that Spurs could maybe exploit City, I think defensively there are still almost not question marks as such, because we don't know how it's going to work. This is kind of a new look defence for City and a new look system, so it'll be interesting to see how that plays out, whether or not City have found balance at the back and in midfield, or if Spurs can really sort of exploit the weaknesses that on paper look like they might be there, but we haven't seen it tested. In terms of predicted score then, well, I think you've got two teams who, traditionally speaking anyway, over the last couple of years, have had goals in them. Obviously, with Thomas Frank coming in, it feels like he's more pragmatic. It feels like he won't necessarily be as gung-ho as the previous matches involving Ange Postecoglou, even if both teams have, not necessarily scored a lot. Sometimes, more often than not, I feel like both teams have scored in these fixtures, so maybe it's a little bit tighter. I would say with City being at home, it feels like they might have the edge. 12:30 kickoffs though, sometimes the crowd can sort of be a little bit more quiet because of that early start, so maybe that plays a part. But I think first home game of the season, City fans will be right up for it, and I'm expecting goals, so apologies if it finishes off a 0-0. As for City though, I mentioned it at the top, it does feel like the optimism is back. The Wolves result was much welcomed after an up and down campaign. I won't cry I won't cry here and say that City have had it bad, third place in an FA Cup final, but at times, most notably that 4-0 against Ange Postecoglou's Spurs, there were certainly low points. So it was a welcome result. It was nice to watch City enjoy themselves, and it felt like the patterns of play had certainly started to come back at times. So again, I'm going in with it with an open mind. If Spurs beat City, but the performance from a City point of view is positive, I'll be delighted with that. If City flatter to deceive but come away with it with a 1-0, 2-1 win, maybe less so. But in these big six matches, it's all about getting the points on the board, and if City want to challenge for the title, they can't afford to be almost left behind early doors. So I would certainly think City look to go out there, get the 3 points, lay down an early marker. It's the first, Chelsea is of course the first game of the weekend, but ahead of the Liverpool matches, ahead of the Arsenal matches, it would be a real statement, I feel like, if City could get one over on their big six rivals. There is certainly, some big matches for City in the early doors. They go away to Brighton, and they've got a Manchester derby, and then in the fifth game of the season, it's down to North London to play Arsenal. So points on the board at this stage of the season, I feel like, is all that matters. In Europe, it's a little bit more of an unknown. Obviously, Tottenham Hotspur sharing the stage with City this season after their incredible Europa League victory. Thank you guys for that once again. But yeah, I just feel like it'll be one of those cases of waiting and seeing how the rest of the European landscape ends up looking. Obviously, you can never write off the big boys in Real Madrid, Bayern Munich. Obviously, Barcelona had a deep run last year as well. So City, I think, will be targeting that competition maybe a little bit more than they have done in previous years, just because it feels like it's a little bit open for grabs. But as always with Guardiola, and as always with Manchester City, it's about the Premier League, which of course continues on Saturday afternoon at the Etihad Stadium. And here's hoping anyway for a Manchester City victory.